Bitcoin price goes up and down. When Bitcoin price goes up, usually more students want to study this topic.
What do you think of ICEF students in generally?
Some questions cannot be solved with data. For instance, that's in fact one of the reasons that I got the job at the Fed.
But have you ever had this fear of not coming up with a new idea?
What you learn affects how you behave.
This is a real fun part of studying. Hi, my name is Stepan Sannikov. I'm in my final year of studies at ICEF. This is another episode of the podcast ICEF Talks. Today we'll talk with Vincent Fardeau, Assistant Professor of Finance at ICEF. We'll discuss government regulation of banks in the US, we'll talk about economic research, and discuss how philosophy is related to economics. Make sure to watch until the end, there will be a contest. Let's go! Hi Vincent.
Hi Stepan.
Well, let's start by talking about what led to your decision to join ICEF.
Well, I joined ICEF 7 years ago. I knew some people here, and I wrote my PhD at the LSE. And as you know, ICEF was initially set up in partnership with the LSE. So in a way, I knew ICEF already I knew already ICEF for some time. And in fact, I had also participated as a PhD student in the international program as a grader. So I guess I had this connection already that existed.
I have friends in France who study at the prep schools.
Yes.
To enter Grande École.
Yeah.
And they say that it's like a full-time work. So it's much harder than studying at a university. Because it takes all your time. You have to study 6 days a week. You have no parties, no
I think you can even study 7 days a week, I guess, yeah. Yes, it's competitive. If you target the top schools, yes, it's competitive. People work a lot. But I think in general, if you are in a good program internationally, bachelor's program, you need to work a lot. Yeah, our system is indeed, it's a bit brutal in the first 2 years. Once you enter the school, it gets easier. It's only a bit later then you start, working hard again.
And why did you decide to pursue a PhD track after your master's degree?
I think one factor was that I had some experience in investment banking. I worked in a research department in an investment bank, and I realized that it would be good to know more. Instead of just finishing HEC with a major in finance, I decided to go for a more complete training in economics. And when you start doing these things, then it gets so interesting that difficult to stop. So.
But have you ever had this fear of not coming up with a new idea or an interesting research topic?
Well, usually the problem is you have many ideas and little time, and among those many ideas, you need to find the best. Because some of them have already been done to some extent, or maybe some of them are actually very difficult to do or not doable at all because there's no data or there's lack of pre-existing knowledge, etc. So I think, usually the problem is not so much too few ideas. The problem usually is to select the right idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I once thought about following a PhD track, but then I became afraid that after 5 years of training in a PhD class, I would not be able to conduct a serious research, or maybe I will struggle with finding the right idea for my paper and coming up with something new.
No, because it's funny that you're saying this because you start with an idea, you do something, it leads to another question. Some people work on the same topic, they come up with something else. From that you find another project. Then you hear something at the conference or in a seminar, gives you another idea. You start working on something else, etc. So yeah, it's never-ending process. I think it's scarcity of questions is usually not the problem.
Okay, so maybe I'll become a PhD candidate. Well, next
You
year
have
I'll
time,
be doing
yes,
my
I think
master's.
you have time, yes, exactly.
Maybe afterwards. And if I understand correctly, you worked in the Federal Reserve System in the US
That's right,
after
yes.
your PhD.
Yes.
So is this a standard route for PhD students to enter government regulators?
So yes, my first job was at the Federal Reserve. I was in the research department there. So for this job, you need to have a PhD. So they consider only PhD, freshly minted PhD students. But after the PhD, basically there are three routes, right? So there are people who go back to industry. They work for a hedge fund. They work for an investment bank. Then you have people who go to academia and they become assistant professors. And then some people work for regulators, central banks, etc. So I worked for a couple of years at the Federal Reserve as a researcher, and then I went back to academia.
And could you tell a little bit about the projects that you had there?
Well, there at university you're doing research and teaching. There, what you do is research and policy work, right? And so I was working on on the papers I had written during my PhD, and in terms of policy work, I work. This was a time where there was intense regulatory activity because this was shortly after the big crisis of 2008, 2009. So I actually took part in some international group of the Basel Committee, working for the Basel Committee, to work on liquidity regulation. So liquidity coverage ratio, net stable funding ratio. The way it works basically is, in practice, you have central bankers from different countries that get assembled into these teams, and they basically write proposals, write literature reviews, discuss potential issues, and so on. And then these proposals are submitted to the committee. Yeah, so Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and then that's how the regulation is crafted. So that's, in terms of policy work, that's one of my main projects. Yes.
Let's maybe talk a little bit about your research area. Could you tell a bit about your research interests and maybe the latest papers that you're working on?
Well, so I would say that I work generally in two fields: the asset pricing restrictions and market microstructure. They are fairly closely connected. I guess asset pricing has a bit more of a macro flavor, if you like, looking at the entire markets. And market microstructure is looking very specifically at the trading rules in some markets. But of course, they are connected because once you understand the microstructure, you understand how the price is formed. And then if you look at this across markets, then you have asset pricing implications. And generally, my research is about strategies of intermediaries. So I study strategic intermediation, essentially. And one thing that I could see when I worked in investment banking and when I worked at the Fed is that we have these large banks, right? We have these large players in the markets. And a lot of the theory has been written assuming that the markets are, essentially very competitive. In some cases, it's true. It was certainly true before, because you had a lot of small investors. But since in the post-Second World War era, you had a big trend towards intermediation of investment, and with the rise of giant investment firms, and these firms have a footprint on the market. And so I study these sort of things. What are the consequences for things like this? For asset markets, for price formation, for price stability, for fire sales, these sort of things.
Yeah, well, I expected a different answer from you actually.
What did you expect?
Yeah, I thought maybe it was affected by the bias of my own opinion why one should work on theory, because I believe that when you work on theory, you have to dig deep into the subject. You have to explore reality as it is. You need to study all the details about interactions of agents, about the markets, about how the prices are formed, etc. And essentially, it contributes to your understanding of reality itself. And
course,
then,
yes.
when you want to construct a theoretical model, you have to take the main points. You need to think about what assumptions can you make, because assumptions are not real. It's something that you need to introduce, and only when you understand the full reality, you can simplify things and present this maybe simpler model.
Well, yes. So assumptions are usually motivated by the reality, right? And I mean, I agree with you. So of course, the thing is, but that's related to my third point when I told you about interpreting the data. The thing is, we have economic intuition, right? Mm-hmm. And where the theory, formalizing this intuition into a model, that is useful because our intuition actually, even if it's very good, it's always limited. So to understand mechanisms, you can understand to some extent intuitively, but there's always up to a certain point where it becomes a bit more blurry. If you write things down, then first, sometimes you realize that your intuition was not correct in the first place. And second, intuitively, you can never say, you can have intuition that sometimes there is this phenomenon occurring and sometimes this other phenomenon, but you will never say intuitively when, or at least not precisely. So it adds a lot of rigor and precision. And finally, it also helps to quantify. Mm-hmm. So if you do sophisticated models, not only they can guide empirical work, but they can also be brought to the data themselves. So there is now, structural economics, structural estimation. So there are new techniques basically to really bring the models and to tie them very closely to the data. Mm-hmm. So the quantification, I don't do that much. I tend to focus more on mechanisms, on the intuitions. But quantification is also part of our work.
It's also
and without theory, without theoretical model, it's difficult to do it.
Yeah, it's also interesting how our economic intuition is developed, because part of it maybe is affected by our consumer behavior, what we buy in supermarkets when we observe price rises, etc. But I believe that 80% of our economic intuition is developed during our university studies. And there is this fun idea that we studied in sociology: is why do economic theories work? And the answer is they work because people study these theoretical models in universities, then they incorporate them into their own decision making and apply them in life. And so there is this reverse causality. But it's just a fun idea.
No, I mean, it's true. Economics is performative, right? That's how it's called. Basically, it is the fact that what you learn affects how you behave. Mm-hmm. We have evidence in that. There's evidence in psychology. There's evidence in finance. For instance, when the Black and Scholes model was published, the prices of options changed a bit. For instance, we have some evidence of that. So there can be a real impact of the theory. So it's actually not so abstract at all.
Let's talk about how your research interests and your research work affects your teaching and teaching at ICEF.
Well, in two ways, I guess. So what I learned through my research or through attending seminars, reading papers, attending conferences, all this usually finds a way into my teaching because it helps me answer questions of students. It helps me give students an idea of where the research is going and what the latest knowledge is. So, for instance, when I teach market efficiency in undergraduate, it's very common because there's still a lot of activity, for instance, in that field. It's very common that I would describe papers that I became aware of recently. And then sometimes, so there's another way, where sometimes it's the students who sort of give me an idea. So it could happen but that's in the context of supervision.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that people come to talk to me about some topic that they want to study in there for the bachelor thesis or the master thesis. And then, I learn something, or it forces me to read something else, and then I start having some new ideas related to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of ICEF students in generally? What are their weaknesses? What are their strong points from your experience?
ICEF students are good. It's quite pleasant to teach at ICEF because there's quite a lot of selection. So we have a lot of good students, and we have people with a lot of potential. I think their strengths typically is a bit more on the quantitative side, and their weakness tends to be in things like essay writing, because I think that's because of the Russian educational system, which doesn't really prepare students to write essays, I guess. So at least those students who come to study economics after high school. And on the contrary, it tends to train them better on the more quantitative side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you say that students are strong in quantitative areas, do you think that sometimes it's difficult to deliver the financial intuition of the material?
For me, or
for you, yeah.
For me, no. But I think the problem is what I noticed in my experience. Those who are more quantitative, the students who are more quantitative, they don't have a lot of problems with the technical side. But sometimes they have difficulty grasping the intuition. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes they come from more like a physics background, mm-hmm, or something like this, and they don't have this mindset that we just discussed. Their minds have not been so shaped yet, mm-hmm, by economic reasoning. So it can be the difficulty. For some people who are very strong technically, it can be a huge asset because not having to care about the technical side allows them precisely to focus on the intuitive, mm-hmm, aspects. And so that can be very useful.
And have you had a lot of students under your supervision who wrote bachelor thesis or master thesis at ICEF?
Yes, quite a few students. So this year a little bit less, but I've had a lot of students. Of course, I guess it's maybe 40 students or something, mm-hmm, like this, maybe more. I don't know.
And what were the most fun topics to discover with them?
The most
interesting themes.
A few years ago,
mm-hmm,
I was not looking at cryptocurrency, crypto markets, and there was, Bitcoin price goes up and down. When Bitcoin price goes up, usually more students want to study this topic, and it has forced me to, understand a bit more the fintech. And actually, this. So I haven't done anything yet, but I am talking with a colleague of mine who has some interest in crypto markets. There are things called automated market makers, and we are trying to keep an eye on the literature because we have some interest for this topic, and we would like to start working on this.
And aren't you afraid that students pick up trendy topics for their bachelor thesis, for example, like cryptocurrencies. But while doing so, they disregard more traditional topics in finance, and therefore they lack some proper understanding of classical theories?
No, I think it's not a problem at all. In fact, whatever the topic, students still have an opportunity to apply economic reasoning. The problem is when, of course, there's a risk that you pick a trendy topic like cryptocurrencies, and then you don't do anything related to economics. But that's my part basically. So I'm here in the supervision process. I'm here, to basically set some framework and say, and to ask questions. So it's always been like this. I didn't know much about these crypto markets, and I have students who come and talk to me about this, and maybe they have started to trade crypto assets, or they are working for some startups or something like this, doing some internships or something. And they start explaining me about what they do and what they want to do for their bachelor thesis. And I ask questions, and I bring them back to, understanding the economics. And so it can be very useful, actually.
Okay. Well, thank you for this interview. Maybe you could give some advice to ICEF freshmen, or maybe some students who just start their path as bachelors.
Generally, when you enter university, I think you need to be very open-minded. You don't really know what lies ahead of you. You're going to learn lots of things that you didn't expect. There's lots of things you're going to discover that you don't know about, that you didn't necessarily expect. And so I would advise people to just keep their eyes open, be curious, be open-minded. And that's the right attitude.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stepan.
Thanks for watching until this video. Let's now talk about the contest. Tell us your story, how you chose to study economics, and the most interesting one will get the prize. Leave your story in the comments with the hashtag. Good luck.